You might think you know exactly where Western philosophy began. Ancient Greece, right?
Yeah.
Land of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle.
That's the standard story, yeah.
But what if we told you that story is, well, much richer, way more complex, and actually starts much earlier? It winds through North Africa, across the Mediterranean, into these vast empires, long before it even hits those familiar Greek shores.
It's a much bigger map than people usually imagine.
Today we're taking a journey, a real deep dive, into the surprisingly global origins of classical philosophy, and also into the fascinating ways scholars actually piece its history together.
Yeah, how do we even know what we think we know?
Exactly. Our mission here is to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, give you a shortcut, really, to understanding how these ancient ideas still profoundly shape our modern world.
They really do, in ways we often don't even realize.
So, to give you a roadmap for this journey, we'll start by exploring how philosophers study their own past. There are three main ways they go about it.
Three distinct approaches, yeah.
Then we'll embark on this sweeping journey through classical philosophy itself. We'll uncover its unexpected Egyptian roots, see it flourish in Greece and Rome, and then watch its remarkable evolution through Jewish, Christian, and Islamic thought.
All leading up towards the dawn of the modern age of reason. It's quite a story.
It really is. So let's unpack this before we, plunge into the history itself.
Right.
We kind of need to understand how we even approach studying philosophy's past. Why even bother? And what are the best ways to do it?
Right. It's a great question. Studying philosophy's history isn't just about, dusty old books. It has real value in itself, intrinsic value, giving us a more accurate picture of our intellectual past.
Okay.
And it has instrumental value, too, because it informs how we think now. It's this incredible source of arguments, ideas, even inspiration, frankly. Historical authors provide this, wellspring of theories that still pop up in debates today.
Sounds vital. And your sources, they highlight three main ways scholars tackle this, which are crucial for us to get our heads around. They call them presentist, contextualist, and hermeneutic.
That's right. Those are the main frameworks.
Let's start with the presentist approach. What's that all about?
Okay, so the presentist approach is essentially looking back at past philosophical texts for arguments that seem relevant today, and often judging them by our present standards.
Oh, okay. Like mining the past for timeless wisdom.
Pretty much, yeah. Finding things that resonate now.
So we're looking for insights that sort of transcend their original moment. Like that Confucian proverb, our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall.
Exactly. Or that maxim, JFK restated it, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
Right. Powerful calls to action. Even now, they feel immediate.
They do. Or even something like Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is probably the best. We use that kind of thinking all the time.
Makes sense.
And the strength is obvious. We get to benefit from this huge body of past wisdom in our everyday lives. But there's a significant weakness. It can really neglect the original historical context. It kind of downplays how philosophers were actually communicating back then. And this often leads to anachronism.
Anachronism,
Yeah.
meaning we mistakenly stick contemporary ideas onto historical figures.
You attribute ideas to them that they wouldn't have recognized.
Can you give us a solid example where this presentist view kind of falls short?
Take Plato's allegory of the cave. Very famous. Many people read it mainly through the lens of epistemology, the study of knowledge or metaphysics, the nature of reality.
Right, the shadows in the real world.
But to claim that's all it's about, that's anachronistic. Its deeper political meaning only really clicks when you understand Plato's Athens. After the Peloponnesian War, the rule of the 30 tyrants, Socrates' death.
So there was a specific political context.
Plato was using the allegory to question the limits of human understanding and solving problems in both tyranny and democracy. He hoped to foster individuals who could actually govern well. If you just pull out the epistemological argument, you miss that whole urgent political layer.
Okay, so it's like reading a movie script without knowing anything about the director, the era, the events it's commenting on. You lose so much.
Precisely.
That really highlights the need for the second approach, the contextualist approach.
The contextualist approach tries to fix that problem. It aims to understand historical philosophy purely on its own terms, using concepts and language appropriate to its specific time period.
Getting the history right.
That's the goal, truly. Getting the history right.
This sounds crucial for avoiding misinterpretation. There was an example from your sources that really jumped out at me, the phrase, an eye for an eye.
Oh yeah, classic example.
Today, we hear that and immediately think, brutal justification for escalating violence, vengeance.
Yes, but contextually. That interpretation is way off. For thousands of years, families or tribes would seek retribution, often way out of proportion. A hand for an insult, a life for a stolen goat, that kind of thing.
Right, escalation.
So this biblical law, which was common across the ancient Middle East, actually meant the wrongdoer shouldn't pay more than an eye for an eye. It was a law restricting retaliation, stopping those endless cycles of violence.
So it was a limit, not a command.
A limit. What's more, it often allowed for monetary payments instead, to avoid physical harm altogether. Understanding that context completely flips the meaning, doesn't it? From brutal revenge to, ancient justice reform.
That's a massive shift in perspective. Okay, but what's the downside here? Is there a risk of getting too lost in the details of the past?
There is, yeah. The main danger is what they call antiquarianism.
Antiquarianism.
Becoming so interested in history, just for history's sake, that you might lose sight of why it still matters to us today. You get the history perfectly right, but maybe ignore its usefulness, its instrumental value for today's problems.
Okay, so one looks too much at the present, the other risks getting stuck in the past.
Sort of, yeah. Which brings us neatly to the third way, the one trying to get the best of both, the hermeneutic approach.
Right. How does that one work?
This approach tries to bridge presentism and contextualism. It takes historical context very seriously, recognizing that philosophical ideas are always historical products.
Okay.
But it also acknowledges that, our own viewpoint, our contemporary framework, inevitably shapes how we interpret the past. It's about having a kind of dialogue between the past and the present.
So it grounds past philosophy historically, but still lets us find lasting value, relevance for today. That sounds like a pretty powerful way to engage.
It can be very powerful, but it has its own potential pitfall. It can sometimes fall into the trap of thinking history logically culminates in, us, in the present.
The A, then B, then C, then me narrative you mentioned.
Exactly that. Assuming there's this clear purpose or inevitable progression leading right up to our current understanding, which might not actually exist. I mean, our perspective today will eventually be just another historical viewpoint for future historians, right?
That's a humbling thought. So for you listening, thinking critically about these three approaches, presentist, contextualist, hermeneutic, helps you not just understand philosophy, but really how you interpret any historical story. Helps you avoid those pitfalls and gain much deeper insights.
Absolutely. It's a critical thinking tool for any kind of history.
Okay, now here's where this deep dive, I think, truly challenges the traditional stories. If we apply that contextualist lens we just discussed, the common idea of philosophy's birthplace, it gets a major rewrite.
It really does. While ancient Greece definitely gave us the word philosophy, philosophia, and obviously these towering figures like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the actual path of classical philosophy, it starts much, much earlier, and in some unexpected places.
Your sources make a really compelling case for the surprising Egyptian origins of classical philosophy. I mean, even ancient Greek historians admitted it.
They did. Herodotus, for instance, the famous Greek historian, he traced lots of Greek beliefs about their gods, religious rituals, geometry, even astrology directly back to Egypt.
Wow.
He specifically mentioned Heliopolis, a major ancient Egyptian city, as this renowned center for learning.
And it wasn't just some vague influence floating across the Mediterranean, right?
Yeah.
Famous Greek thinkers actually went there to study.
That's right. Plato, for example, studied in Heliopolis for 13 years. And Pythagoras, the theorem guy, he apparently spent over 2 decades studying mathematics there.
20 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Which leads to this astonishing insight you mentioned, the so-called Pythagorean theorem.
Yeah.
It existed way before Pythagoras.
Get this. Babylonian clay tablets from around 1800 BCE, like one called Plimpton 322, show really advanced knowledge of geometry, Pythagorean triples, basically, over 1,000 years before him.
1,000 years.
And Egyptian papyri also show similar calculations, so it's highly, highly likely he learned these concepts in Egypt rather than discovering them himself. It really makes you question how we attribute intellectual breakthroughs.
Mind-blowing. And it goes beyond math, doesn't it, into really deep philosophical concepts. Tell us about this pharaoh Akhenaten.
Right. Akhenaten, mid-14th century BCE. He established Aten, the sun disk, as the one true god, a form of monotheism.
Early on.
Yeah, but the really philosophical bit is how he conceived of Aten. He posited solar energy as the source of all elements, an unseen divinity, a first cause, the one in the millions.
An unseen first cause.
This core idea, a single, invisible, unchanging source or substance creating the material world, It predates Plato by centuries, but it sounds remarkably similar to key aspects of Plato's metaphysics, his theory of forms. It suggests maybe this drive to find ultimate unity is a recurring theme in human thought across cultures.
Now, of course, this whole idea of African and Middle Eastern influences on Greek thought, it hasn't always been easily accepted. Your sources mentioned the Black Athena controversy.
Yes, and this is a perfect example of why thinking critically about historical narratives is so important. Martin Bernal, in his books, argued strongly for these African and Middle Eastern roots for Greek culture. He claimed this ancient model acknowledging the debt was basically suppressed and replaced by a racist Aryan model in the 19th century. Then Mary Lefkowitz strongly critiqued Bernal. She acknowledged Greek debt to Egypt and the Near East, but argued against Bernal's claims of massive derivation, emphasizing more independent Greek development. It became this huge academic war of words.
Right.
And we're just reporting on this debate here, obviously not taking sides. But it's crucial for understanding how historical scholarship itself can become deeply tangled with ethics and politics, and how narratives about the past are constructed and contested.
A really important point about critically examining sources and narratives. So, having challenged maybe some assumptions about Greek origins, let's finally turn to the incredibly fertile ground of ancient Greek philosophy itself. This is where many of these diverse threads started weaving together into what we usually think of as Western thought.
Yes, and here we really see the shift, this move from myth-based explanations, mythos, to reason-based explanations, logos. Early thinkers, the ones we often lump together as the pre-Socratics, they were obsessed with fundamental questions about the universe.
Like, what's the basic stuff everything's made of? Does anything really change?
Exactly. And it's fascinating how quickly they split on that last question. You had thinkers like Parmenides on one side. He argued that reality, true reality, is fundamentally unchanging. One, eternal, indivisible. Our senses might show us motion and change, but nope, that's just an illusion, deceiving us.
An illusion? How did he argue that?
Well, he was so committed that his student, Zeno, came up with those famous paradoxes to prove it. Like the idea that to walk to the park, you first have to go half the distance.
Right, and then half of the remaining distance.
Not half of that, and so on, forever, creating an infinite number of points you'd have to cross. Zeno argued this shows motion is logically impossible. It really forces you to question perception versus logic.
Okay, so that's the unchanging side. Who was on the other side?
Heraclitus famously countered, all is in flux. Panta rei, everything flows. His famous line is, you cannot step twice into the same river.
Because both you and the river are constantly changing.
Precisely. So these two big ideas, permanence versus flux, being versus becoming, they created this core tension. And it's the tension that later philosophers, especially Plato, felt they absolutely had to resolve.
That underlying tension, right. Okay, then came the giants, Socrates and Plato. Socrates. The torpedo fish, you called him.
Yeah, or a gadfly sometimes. He'd wander around Athens, questioning everyone, craftsmen, politicians, poets, making them realize they didn't really know what they thought they knew. Famously claimed he knew nothing except the extent of his own ignorance.
But he didn't write anything down.
Nope, wrote nothing. We know him almost entirely through the writings of his students, mainly Plato, which is its own fascinating historical puzzle. Eventually, democratic Athens tried and executed him for essentially doing philosophy, a martyr for the cause.
And Plato, his student, took that Socratic method and built this incredible philosophical system trying to solve that permanence versus flux problem with his theory of forms.
Right. The real genius here, or the core idea anyway, is how Plato suggested that every material thing we see, like a beautiful flower or a just action, or even a simple triangle drawn in the sand, it's just an imperfect imitation, a shadow, participating in an immaterial, eternal, unchanging, perfect form or essence. The form of beauty itself, the form of justice, the form of triangularity.
So the forms of the real reality, the blueprints.
Exactly, the ultimate reality. Our world is just the flickering, changing, imperfect reflection. So individual flowers bloom and die, but the form of beauty, that's eternal. This system brilliantly reconciled Parmenides' unchanging reality, the forms, with Heraclitus' flux, the material world, and it gave us a framework for thinking about ideals versus everyday imperfections that we still use.
And the philosopher's job was to try and grasp these forms.
Yes, through reason, to access the forms, understand true reality, and then, ideally for Plato, come back down into the cave and lead others the idea of the philosopher king.
Okay, and then comes Aristotle, Plato's most famous student, often called just the philosopher. He starts with wonder.
Philosophy begins in wonder, yes. And Aristotle really embodied that. He resisted Plato's more mystical tendencies, focusing much more on this world, on empirical observation, on the details of reality around us. Less focused on the forms, more on the things themselves. His four causes gave people this amazing toolkit for understanding pretty much anything. Ask four questions. What's it made of? Material cause. What is its form or structure? Formal cause. What agent made it? Efficient cause. And what is its purpose or end goal? Final cause or telos.
You could apply that to anything.
Anything. A statue, a plant, a human being, even the entire universe. Applying it to the cosmos led him to argue for a first cause, or prime mover, something that initiates motion without being moved itself, which he described enigmatically as thought thinking itself.
Wow. And he also had a very kind of grounded view of the soul and ethics.
Very much so. For Aristotle, all living things have souls, but they differ by function. Plants have a vegetative soul growth, nutrition. Animals add movement, perception, desire. And humans. We add reason, logos on top of all that.
And ethics. What's the goal for humans?
The goal, the telos of human life for Aristotle is eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but it's more like human flourishing, living well, fulfilling our potential as rational beings.
How do you achieve that?
By cultivating virtues arheti, which aren't just feelings, they're stable habits of character, like courage, justice, temperance, wisdom, finding the right balance, the golden mean between extremes.
Okay, so from Greece, let's jump across to Roman philosophy. They borrowed heavily from the Greeks, didn't they? But gave it their own spin.
Many Roman philosophers even wrote in Greek. That's how strong the influence was. But their cultural and political context was really different. And one fascinating difference is how philosophy connected with politics.
How so?
Well, Plato was pretty ambivalent, even critical, about the messiness of actual democracy. But Roman thinkers like Cicero, who was a major statesman, and Marcus Aurelius, who was literally the emperor.
The emperor philosophy.
He did, his meditations. They were deeply involved in practical politics. Although it's true that as the Roman Republic collapsed and became an empire, many philosophers did turn their focus inward towards personal ethics and peace of mind.
Which seems like a perfect lead-in to Stoicism. The Romans really embraced that, didn't they?
They really did. Stoicism, with its emphasis on rational self-control, inner freedom, accepting what you can't change, it really resonated with the Roman character, or at least the Roman ideal.
What were its core ideas?
4 core virtues: courage, justice, temperance or moderation, and wisdom. The key was understanding the difference between what's in your control, your judgments, your reactions, your will, and what's not in your control. External events, other people's actions, your health sometimes.
Focus on what you can control.
Exactly. Marcus Aurelius, in his meditations, constantly advises himself on this. Deal with grief by correcting your judgment about the event, not the event itself. If a goal isn't achieved, either act if you can, or serenely accept it, even accept the end of life itself. It's very pragmatic.
And they had a concept of God too, right? But different from Plato's forms.
Very different. For the Stoics, God wasn't some separate, immaterial being. God was a material entity, a kind of fiery breath or pneuma, an animating reason logos, again, that was immanent within nature, organizing and managing everything meticulously, a sort of material first cause woven into the fabric of the cosmos.
Interesting. And finally, for the Romans, you mentioned academic skepticism and Neoplatonism.
Right. Academic skeptics, like Cicero was for a time, took Socrates' "I know that I know nothing" very seriously. They argued that, true, certain knowledge is impossible for humans, so instead of certainty, we should rely on degrees of belief or probability to make judgments and act in the world.
And Cicero's rediscovery later was important.
Hugely important. When his works were rediscovered in the 15th century, his eloquent Latin and his philosophical ideas about rhetoric, law, and skepticism played a big role in sparking the European Renaissance.
Wow. And Neoplatonism.
Neoplatonism, mainly associated with Plotinus in the 3rd century CE, was a major revival and reinterpretation of Plato's ideas. It became hugely influential, especially on later Christian, Jewish, and Islamic thought. A key problem they wrestled with was, how could a perfect, single, unchanging God, or the One, create this messy, imperfect, changing universe?
How do they explain it?
Through a process called emanation. Like light radiating from the sun, reality flows outwards from the One in stages, becoming less perfect, less unified the further it gets from the source. It's a fascinating attempt to bridge that gap between the perfect and the imperfect.
Okay, so we've traced this incredible path: Egypt, Greece, Rome.
Mhm.
Seeing philosophy evolve through different cultures, different core concepts like forms, causes, logos, inner control. But now things get really interesting, right? How did all these classical ideas interact, sometimes clashing, sometimes blending with the big monotheistic religions that were emerging and growing?
Yeah, this marks a really profound shift in the history of thought. Because unlike many of the classical Greek and Roman philosophers who are often, starting from scratch, trying to figure out the world through reason alone,
Right.
Jewish, Christian, and Islamic philosophers were always working with certain foundational religious beliefs already in place, like the absolute belief in one God who created the world ex nihilo out of nothing.
Which would immediately clash with someone like Aristotle.
Exactly. Aristotle thought the universe was eternal, uncreated. So right away, you have this creative tension between revealed religious tenets and the conclusions of Greek philosophical reasoning. How do you reconcile them? That became a central project.
Let's start with early Jewish philosophy. Greek culture Hellenization was spreading. How did that impact Jewish thought?
It definitely had an impact, especially among wealthier, more urban Jews who were exposed to Greek education and ideas. And the key figure bridging these worlds early on is Philo of Alexandria.
Philo, around the turn of the millennium.
Yeah, roughly 20 BCE to 50 CE. He was really the first we know of who systematically tried to blend Plato's philosophy with Jewish scripture, the Torah.
How did he do that?
He did it mainly through allegory. He identified Plato's eternal forms with the logos, which he interpreted as the word or reason or even the thoughts of God. This logos acted as a kind of intermediary between the transcendent, unknowable God and the created physical world.
So when the Bible says God said, "Let there be light,"
For Philo, that saying was the logos, the rational principle, the unmoved mover in action, bringing the forms into reality. It's a brilliant synthesis. And his work, interestingly, was mostly preserved by early Christian thinkers who found his concept of the logos incredibly useful for understanding the nature of Christ. It laid crucial groundwork.
Fascinating. Okay, moving into early Christian philosophy, as the Roman Empire starts to decline in the West, the Catholic Church steps into that cultural vacuum, doesn't it? And it uses these classical tools.
It really does. It becomes the main preserver and transmitter of learning, including philosophy. And the towering figure here, impossible to overestimate his influence, is Augustine.
Augustine of Hippo, late 4th, early 5th century.
Right. His Confessions is just incredible. Part autobiography, part theological reflection, exploring faith, memory, desire. He developed this really unique theory of time, arguing that really the present truly exists, but it's a present that holds the memory of the past and the anticipation of the future.
And he wrestled with big theological issues too, free will.
Hugely. He defended Christian orthodoxy against various heresies. He argued all of God's creation was fundamentally good, and even evil exists only as a privation, a lack of goodness ultimately fitting into God's plan. On free will, he saw it as this internal conflict, a divided will, between the desire for good and the pull of sinfulness. Ultimately, he believed we need divine grace to consistently choose the good, but that choice is still somehow within our power. It's complex.
Sounds like it. And another crucial link was Boethius.
Yes, Boethius, about a century after Augustine, another vital intermediary figure. He wrote his most famous work, The Consolation of Philosophy, while he was imprisoned, awaiting execution by the Ostrogothic king.
Grim circumstances.
Very. And in the book, he imagines Lady Philosophy visiting him in his cell. She teaches him that true happiness, eudaimonia again, isn't found in fleeting things like wealth or power, but in virtue, wisdom, family, things of lasting value, ultimately found in God, who he identifies with Plato's form of the good.
And what's amazing, you said, is that it barely mentions Christianity.
Hardly at all. It's steeped in Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics. It shows just how deeply integrated these classical philosophical ideas had become within a broadly Christian worldview by that point. His work was massively influential throughout the Middle Ages.
Okay, fast forward a bit. This brings us to a really vibrant period, the golden age of learning in Islamic philosophy.
As learning perhaps declined somewhat in Western Europe after Rome's fall, the Islamic world became this major center for preserving, translating, and crucially, advancing ancient knowledge, especially Greek philosophy and science. Cities like Alexandria, then Baghdad, Cordova in Spain, they were hubs of intellectual activity.
And who were some of the key thinkers? You mentioned Ibn Sina.
A Persian polymath, philosopher, physician, astronomer, lived around 970 to 1037, often considered the absolute linchpin for the most creative phase of Islamic philosophy.
What were some of his big ideas?
Well, his proof of the truthful was a very influential argument for God's existence. It starts from the observation that everything in the world is contingent. It exists, but it doesn't have to exist. It comes and goes.
Okay.
But if everything is contingent, there must be something that is not contingent, something that exists necessarily by its very nature. And that, he argued, is God, the necessary existent.
Makes sense. And he worked on knowledge, too, epistemology.
Yeah, he had a sophisticated theory. He proposed humans are born with a rational soul, kind of like a blank slate, tabula rasa. We gather sensory data through external senses, and then internal senses process it, memory, imagination. Through abstraction and reflection, we grasp intelligible concepts and observe causal relationships. It sounds a bit like Locke's later empiricism, actually.
And he was into science method, too.
Very much so. Building on Aristotle, Ibn Sina developed ideas about experimental methodology. He stressed the importance of looking for falsification, trying to disprove a correlation, which is key to modern science. And he insisted that just finding a correlation isn't enough. You need to identify the actual causal property or term. For example, it's not just that scammony purges bile, but some specific property in scammony that causes the purging. That's a big step towards real scientific explanation.
Then there was Ibn Rushd, or Averroes, later on in Spain.
Ibn Rushd, yes, lived 1126 to 1198 in Al-Andalus, Muslim-ruled Spain. He was hugely important for reviving interest in the original works of Aristotle in the Islamic world, and later, through Latin translations of his commentaries, in Christian Europe, too. He argued Aristotle's philosophy was the highest form of truth accessible to human reason.
And how did he see the relationship between this philosophy and religious faith?
He was a strong advocate for their compatibility. He championed what he called demonstration, rigorous, logical, and scientific reasoning as the path to philosophical certainty. And he argued that the Quran itself actually requires believers to study philosophy and reflect on creation. He'd quote verses like, "Reflect you who have vision," to support his case.
So reason and faith could work together.
For Ibn Rushd, absolutely. They led to the same truths, just via different paths. He even developed arguments for God's existence based on the intricate design and purpose observed in nature, arguments that sound remarkably like modern intelligent design arguments.
But this view wasn't universally accepted, was it? There was conflict.
Oh, definitely. There was a famous intellectual clash, primarily between the philosopher Al-Ghazali and the Aristotelians like Ibn Rushd. Al-Ghazali, in his book The Incoherence of the Philosophers, argued strongly against relying too heavily on Greek philosophy, claiming it led to errors and undermined religious faith. He favored a more mystical, experiential path to knowing God.
And Ibn Rushd responded.
He did, with his own book, The Incoherence of the Incoherence. He defended philosophy, insisting on the harmony of reason and revelation. This whole debate was hugely important and highlights that ongoing tension between rationalism and fideism, reliance on faith alone that echoes down through the centuries, even today.
And Jewish philosophers were also deeply engaged in these conversations during the medieval period.
Immensely so. The towering figure is Moses Maimonides, who lived 1138 to 1204. Born in Cordova, like Ibn Rushd, also a physician and philosopher. His major work, The Guide for the Perplexed, directly addresses the apparent conflicts between Aristotelian philosophy, particularly the idea of an eternal universe, and Jewish beliefs in creation, miracles, and prophecy.
How did he tackle it?
He argued that many apparent conflicts arise from taking scripture too literally, especially passages that seem to describe God in human terms, anthropomorphically. He believed these were barriers to true knowledge of God.
So, how can we know God, according to Maimonides?
This is radical. He proposed a negative theology. Because God is utterly unique and unlike anything in creation, we can't truly say what God is in positive terms. We can only really know what God is not. God is not physical, not multiple, not changing, not affected by emotions.
So you define God by stripping away limitations.
Exactly. And when scripture uses positive attributes like merciful or gracious, Maimonides argued these describe God's actions in the world as we perceive them, not God's unknowable essence. It's a very sophisticated way to protect divine transcendence while still allowing for meaningful religious language.
Okay, all of the synthesis, conflict, and deep thinking across these traditions, it seems to be setting the stage for another major shift. The rise of reason in the early modern era.
You see a gradual but profound change starting. A move away from religious orthodoxy or ancient authority being the sole source of truth towards human reason, mathematical logic, and direct scientific observation taking precedence.
And Nicholas Copernicus is a key figure here.
Copernicus, 1473 to 1543. His proposal of the heliocentric model that the Earth revolves around the sun directly challenged not only the centuries-old Ptolemaic system, but also the Church's interpretation of Scripture, which supported a geocentric view.
And he was nervous about publishing it.
Terrified. He delayed publishing for decades, finally dedicating the work to the Pope when it came out near his death. But his challenge to the consensus of many centuries, based on mathematical reasoning and observation, was a crucial step in shifting the authority for truth about the natural world towards, well, natural philosophers, what we'd now call scientists.
And then there's a fascinating, perhaps less familiar figure you mentioned, Zera Yacob from Ethiopia.
Yes, Zera Yacob, 1592 to 1692, an Ethiopian scholar who, during a period of religious conflict, fled and lived in isolation in a cave for 2 years. There, he wrote his work, the Hatata, which means the inquiry.
And what did he argue?
He argued that human reason is the essential tool for evaluating all claims, including religious traditions. He critically examined Judaism, Islam, Christianity, concluding that because their laws and beliefs often contradict each other, they can't all be divinely true in their specifics. He rejected the idea that any one religion had a monopoly on truth.
He questioned miracles, too.
He did. He famously argued that God, having established the consistent laws of creation, wouldn't violate those own laws through miracles. What's really compelling is that he developed these rationalist, critical ideas independently, drawing on his own reason and experience, arriving at conclusions that resonate strongly with the European Enlightenment thinkers who came slightly later.
So these thinkers, Copernicus challenging cosmic consensus, Yacob championing reason over tradition, alongside many others, they were really laying the groundwork for what we call the Enlightenment.
An era where human reason was elevated as the primary guide for understanding the world and organizing society, propelling scientific inquiry and fundamentally shaping the modern world.
What an incredible journey we've taken. From figuring out how we even study philosophy's history, to uncovering those surprising Egyptian roots, tracing the brilliance of Greece and Rome, and then seeing how faith and reason intertwined, clashed, and evolved through Jewish, Christian, and Islamic thought.
Yeah, seeing the monumental figures and the huge shifts in thinking that brought us right up to the cusp of the modern age.
It really brings it home.
It really does. And it's so clear that the foundations of what we consider modern science, our ethical debates, even our political structures, they are just deeply, deeply rooted in these incredibly rich, complex, and diverse philosophical traditions.
It wasn't just one straight line from Greece.
Not at all. These debates, what is knowledge? What is reality? What's the role of reason versus revelation? They were happening across cultures, in conversation with each other, for millennia. We are in so many ways still participating in those ancient conversations, still asking the same fundamental questions.
So a final thought then, for you listening. Consider how that core tension, the one between faith and reason, which was explored so profoundly by these ancient and medieval thinkers, how does it continue to play out in our world today? You see it everywhere, from debates about scientific discoveries to navigating personal beliefs.
How much of our own contemporary thinking is still grappling, maybe unknowingly, with these very ancient questions? And maybe ask yourself, what new unmoved movers or unquestioned forms do we embrace today as ultimate truths without even realizing it? What are the background assumptions shaping our own age?